Okay, I don't really know what to say. I think the hardest part about making a video for YouTube is knowing what to say, knowing what to talk about, knowing what to share, knowing what's worth sharing, what's not worth sharing. I think those are sort of the hardest parts about doing this. It's ironic because I feel like normally anybody who knows me, in person, would probably agree that I could probably talk endlessly about any topic. I have lots of formed opinions on lots of different things. I spend a lot of time taking in a lot of information, processing it. I write a lot as well, which is my way of sort of organizing information and synthesizing it in a way that makes sense with my worldview. And what that allows me to do is it allows me to talk about a lot of things with a fair degree of knowledge behind a lot of these topics. Now, by no means am I an expert in any of these things. I can hold my own in an economic and finance conversation. I can hold my own in sort of a business administration conversation. I can hold my own in a physics conversation, in a chemistry conversation, in a medicine conversation. I can hold my own in a philosophy conversation, in an aesthetics conversation. I can hold my own in an architecture conversation. But somehow, despite all of this, making a YouTube video is what gets me. That's where I lose all. That's where the cat got my tongue. If you want to use one of those idioms, right? They say you should talk to the camera the way you would speak to your best friend. I think that's what I'm doing. I think that's what I usually do. I think anybody who's ever got a lunch with me or something like that would see that, the way I record this video is practically the same as how I speak with people over food, over lunch, or whatever. I speak with you the same way if I was on a phone call with you, This is just that's what I'm doing. But still, how to make it useful and valuable for you is what stumps me. Because I don't know what the YouTube audience cares about. I don't have an audience, so I guess it doesn't matter, right? So I guess anybody who would watch these videos probably doesn't care about me, 99% people. But the 1% people that might actually watch the videos and watch the next one would watch it because perhaps they resonated with me specifically. So perhaps the value I'm sharing is sharing my life and using that as a way to sort of perhaps maybe inspire younger people. That sounds positive. That sounds good. I am a first generation, soon to be American. I was born in a very poor country. I was born in a very interesting marriage. I was born as the child in a very interesting marriage where, my mother came from a historically very strong family background, but they were stricken with poverty for years before, they had me. So for my mother's childhood was all poverty stricken. Not utter poverty, because her mother had lots of children, and so all of those children, and she had lots of children, 10 children, maybe it was 8 children, spaced out every few years, so a new child was always entering the workforce and bringing some money in for the family. So they were able to get by, but that's how. And my father was sort of a different situation, where he came from a pretty wealthy family, a very wealthy family background. But his father passed away when he was pretty young, same as my mom's father. Wow, I never noticed that. I never thought about that. Both of their fathers passed away when they were young. Regardless, my father's mother, my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, she really disliked spending money. She was a very, very simple, fundamentals, basics type of woman. She had no decorations in her room. She had really nothing really. She believed in a very ascetic lifestyle. And so that's how my dad grew up. And that's how my dad is as well. Now, long story short, lots of family drama happens, and my dad gets pretty much cut off from the rest of the family. And so he has no access to any of this family wealth or anything. None at all. He didn't have money to take a flight to go to Egypt for a conference. That would be a major step in his career. He didn't have the money to do that. He had to save up for a very long time to be able to do that. he wasn't allowed to take the board exams that he needed to take to be able to get into an affordable degree program. So my mom and my dad used their honeymoon as a cover story to go to a different city where my dad was able to go and take this exam. You don't hear stories like this happening from people. I don't hear stories like this happening in the US, These are challenges and problems and solutions to problems that a lot of folks are just completely unfamiliar with here. So, stories like this and backgrounds like this have been what have informed my perspective. When I was born, this was the environment I was born into as well. Granted, I had lots of familial support. That's one good thing about the Eastern culture. Families will not leave you behind. Unfortunately, eventually that didn't really work out either. And, my mom, my dad, me, and eventually my sister, we sort of broke away from everybody in many regards. And it's what was needed to be able to, achieve anything in this world. My dad had to do this. And it was very painful. There were a lot of summers, a lot of holidays, a lot of occasions when you expect familial presence, wider familial presence, and we didn't have that. The four of us were the family. That's it. I really don't know how I got into this conversation. I don't know how I got into this topic. But that's a bit about my background, right? That's where I come from. That's a worldview that I have been carrying with me for years. Now, add on to this, the fact that as part of my dad being able to break away from this environment, and my mom as well, obviously with him, the job he had to take had him sort of go from one country to the next, and these countries were always countries that were severely suffering. There were countries that were breaking down in real time, and just when they were breaking down or had broken down is when my dad would show up there with his wife, 8-year-old son and 4-year-old daughter, then eventually 10-year-old son and 6-year-old daughter, and rinse and repeat. It's me and my sister, multiple countries over multiple years. It was almost funny, like these were our vacations. Our vacations were some of the countries of the world that were breaking down, some of the worst countries in the world. We would show up when they had been breaking down the most. You would show up there, and what was weird is that in those countries, we were probably amongst the top 1%. If not one, then definitely top 5%. In those countries. That's not to say that we were very wealthy. That's to say how poor and poverty-stricken the average citizen of that country was. And so when you were at the top 1 or 5%, in this case, opposites don't attract. In this case, like attracts like. And so you end up socializing with other people who are used to the luxuries and facilities of top 1%, top 5% lifestyle. Wealth sort of compresses at the top, is what I saw in the world. If you're a top 1% in one country, you'll generally get along with the top 1% of a different country. Even though the things you have access to in your country might be completely different than what they have access to, but when you're both in a foreign country, that new country, the third country that you're all new to, it will only have so many ways of satisfying the needs and wants and craves and desires of the wealthy, of the rich. And so everybody sort of gets smushed into that. The billionaires, the millionaires, and the normal, highly paid employees. You all get smushed into the same experiences. Because the country doesn't have the infrastructure to sort of have even more levels, You're not going to have a yacht off the coast of Kenya. It's not going to happen. It might happen in New York. It's not going to happen in Kenya. But what you will have in Kenya is you'll have a really nice hotel that the billionaire will be able to afford, the millionaire will be able to afford, and a highly paid employee will be able to afford. And you'll get decent service relative to the country standards, right? That's how these things work in these countries. And so that's the other thing that I grew up being used to. And I take all of that and I bring it to the US, where I am now for the past 10 years, maybe a little bit longer actually. Actually, not longer, 9 years. 9 years. I came here in 2014. It is now 2025. Oh, okay. So 11 years. Oops, wow, I can't do it. And so eventually, in 2014, by the time I got to New York City, I had lived in Pakistan, I had lived in Lebanon, and I had lived in Kenya. Kenya for the longest amount of time, around 5 years, Lebanon around 2 years, Pakistan, I don't know, birth through, I think it was like second grade or something like that. There was a brief stint we were in England, but I usually don't really count it because it was a very brief stint. So it might as well have been a vacation. Maybe it was a vacation, I don't even remember. Regardless, eventually we show up to New York City in 2014. And I'm just amazed by this place. I'm struck by this place. Buildings are taller than any buildings I've seen. The sheer amount of people on the streets is mind-boggling. Mind-boggling. And then not only the amount of people on the streets, but frankly, the socioeconomic level of the people in the streets. Mind-boggling. And what I mean by that is you notice these things immediately. In New York City, the people on the streets aren't the same people that were walking the streets in Kenya and Lebanon. Lebanon was a little bit better, but Kenya was not. These people were wearing, in New York City, were wearing expensive clothing. Nike boots, Adidas shoes, Timberlands, I'll come to learn later, very soon. Canada Goose jackets, I will learn about later, but at first you still notice them and you still can tell they're expensive things. So many people wearing suits in the streets, well-paved streets. I've always seen these in movies and whatnot, but it's different when you just are there and you're looking around. Everything around you is that. It's like you are now in the movie, And you realize that the movie was just a small part. There's actually way more. So I'm seeing all these things, and it's mind-boggling at first. I start noticing that everybody has an iPhone. Everybody has an iPhone. I remember being so struck by this. I was on the M34A bus, and I looked around, and frankly, even the people whom I could tell were just not, the highest socioeconomic levels of New York City, even these people had iPhones on them. And I was so confused. And we didn't understand it. Soon we did, when we realized, how pervasive this idea of phone plans are and monthly billing is. It seems like in America, this was a big culture shock for me and my entire family, I believe. Definitely for me. Is everything in America was a drawn-out payment, a long-winded payment. Nothing was, here, I have this much money, give me this is mine, this is your money. It was almost never like that. Very rarely so. Hey Google, lights on. The vast majority of the time, it was like, oh, there's this $1,000 iPhone, but guess what? You can have it too for $20 a month for the next, 2 or 3 years. And don't worry if anything goes wrong with that. You can just trade it in later and get the newer iPhone and just basically be on a payment plan for a phone for the rest of your life. And when you put it that way, you realize how insane it is. But I think in the moment, people see the option to get the greatest, latest technology, an iPhone, and they see that, they don't have a lot of money in their pockets working their minimum wage job. And so they do it, they get it, and they get stuck in this pattern. That's what I rationalized based on what I was observing on these bus routes, on the M15, on the M34A. Honestly, those are the only 2 bus routes I usually took. Yeah, it was interesting, right? It's not something I was used to. Not something I was used to at all. So these are the experiences that I started having once I got to the U.S. We'll save high school and college and all these things for later. I'll naturally talk about these things later. But all of that brings me to where I am today. Fast forwarding the educational aspects of middle school and of high school and college, of course. And now I'm in medical school. And in many regards, I feel like I have unlocked, it's not considered humble to say this, but frankly, I think the cockiest thing one can do is try to fake humble. I'll never fake humility. I'll never fake any of that nonsense. I hate it when people do that. This is another thing that I think a lot of Americans don't realize they do all the time, that almost anybody who's lived outside of America in actually bad countries will immediately pick up on, and they might not tell you, but they'll think you're being a jackass. And so I'll never do that stuff. I speak to the people who've had my background, not the people who grew up thinking that you need a fake humility. So that being said, frankly, I do think I have unlocked the upper echelons of professional society, or I'm on the track of doing so in medical school. I think it's fair and reasonable to say that. I think in America, a doctor, a lawyer, and now for the past few years, a tech worker, even though frankly that's going to go down, I think. So doctors and lawyers in America are really the upper echelons of professional society in America. The only class that beats them is the entrepreneurial class. And that's not for everybody, of course. And so now I'm here. Very privileged, very lucky to be here. I worked very hard for it, exceptionally hard for it. You know, Rockefeller has a quote, I might put it up on the screen, but the gist of it is that, you know, luck comes to those who create it. You expand the surface area with which you may catch luck by taking action, by doing things. Luck doesn't just come to you. Opportunities don't just come to you. You need to be prepared to be able to see and capitalize on the opportunity. You're never going to be prepared unless you have been putting in the work to be able to even see the opportunity when it is there. Really, I think this is why so many entrepreneurs end up having so much success, because, you know, they look at the same thing as most people would, but they'll see an opportunity in there because they've put in so much work prior that the way they look at things has changed so much that they're able to notice things that other people just gloss over and then take advantage of that and run with that all the way. But I digress. So now I'm in medical school, and I'm very lucky to be here, and I'm very privileged to be here. I also feel a sense of guilt. Guilt, not because I've done anything wrong, but because I feel like I'm not doing enough. And so I feel that it is my responsibility to speak, to share my story, to share how I got here, what I've learned, what I did, what I wouldn't do. Just share my experience and really help other people that have been in my similar position or are currently in where I was a few years ago, help them sort of understand the opportunities that are there for them. Help them see those opportunities, help them utilize those opportunities, and help them achieve the things that they want to achieve. Not necessarily the things that I've achieved or that I want to achieve. I don't need to talk to just carbon copies of younger me's. I don't need that. I don't want that. What I do want is to be able to speak with somebody who believes in crafting their own future, in crafting their own destiny. And I say that word very seriously. I used to laugh at phrases like that. I mean it so seriously now. As you get older, what I have found is you'll come across lots of people, more and more, frankly, as you get older, people who resign themselves to fate, resign themselves from life, resign themselves from action. They take what is coming to them, and that's it. And they assume that this is the best that can happen. And then they complain, and then they yell, and in different ways. You know, you can use many different adjectives for this, but the core idea is they complain. They complain about the way their life is and the way things are turning out for them. They yell at their politicians, they yell at the rich billionaires, they yell at other rich people, they yell at anybody who's doing better than them. Because they feel like they've been left behind. And they have been left behind. But they've been left behind due to their own actions of resigning themselves to their existing fate. They have lost hope. So, hope is the one thing I want to be able to help you see and have and maintain and grow. A conversation I have with my mother all the time is that, you know, when her and my dad had me, as I was growing up, the highest fate and expectation and hope they probably had for me is for their son to become a doctor in Pakistan. That was probably the topmost thing they could imagine for myself. That was like the peak of success in their eyes. Lo and behold, their son ends up traveling the rest of the world, ending up in the US and being on route to becoming a doctor in America, which, if you're an immigrant family or immigrant background or immigrant watching this, I can't even emphasize how much of a next level of dream that is for most people, right? I'm aware of that. And then lo and behold, I don't think they were even expecting ever that that same son would end up so embroiled in the entrepreneurship world, would build a company, would build a business, and would be able to grow it enough to see that he can make 10 times the amount of money in his business than he would with even medicine. I don't think they ever expected that, right? I didn't expect that. I'm operating now in completely uncharted waters for myself, for my family, and from where our mental limits were. I'll talk more about, my business activities on those things later and other things that I'm planning and doing. But what I'm trying to get at is that you really need to allow yourself to expand your event horizon of what's possible. A lot of people will laugh at you, will think you're stupid, will think you're being cringe, they'll do whatever, use whatever negative verb you want to add in there. But the core idea is they will make you feel crazy and dumb for wanting and thinking things you want and think. But you have to always remind yourself that more likely than not, in fact, I'm almost certain this is what's happening, they are simply speaking from their own exposures and their own mental capabilities. And if you want to do the things you want to do, you need to accept that, frankly, your exposures will need to be different and your mental capabilities will likely need to be higher. I'm not saying you're smarter or better than them. I'm not saying that. By higher, I mean that you will need to be more receptive to new ideas than perhaps they are. Because if they were, they wouldn't have these limits in their brain and their thinking. You need to be more receptive to opportunity than they are. Because if you weren't, then you would agree with them. And if they were, then they would agree with you that these things are possible. That's what it means to not resign yourself to your current fate, to have hope. It means to be receptive to the idea that opportunities are out there, that they can happen to you, and that they require actions and work that are foreign to you. They are foreign to you because that's not your present reality. That's part of the process. It's not some anomaly. It's not some error in the system and how things work. That is literally the game. You enjoy your current life because it is familiar to you. Hence, if you want a better life, that is unfamiliar to you. Hence, you will feel uncomfortable getting there. So if you feel uncomfortable doing certain things that you know to be right, know you are on the right path. And other people simply don't understand. Lots of tangents in this video, but I think I'll leave it over there because I think it's a good sense of sort of what I'm about and things I think about, and a little bit of a preface for anything else I might talk about in the future. That's it.